I want to thank all of you. I know it's been a long day, and I appreciate you guys for hanging around and staying around with us after our typical time constraint. And I want to extend that same appreciation to the panelists here, who again are staying with us late into the day, and I think that's going above and sometimes beyond what we ought to expect from people. So I want you in advance to give everyone a hand here, and thank you. Really important panel, and one of the reasons I'm moderating it or facilitating it is because it was sort of my idea. Because when we plan these conferences the last 2 or 3 years, and we're strategizing what topics we're going to cover, every year we'd say, okay, let's have a panel on hemp. And as any of you who are sort of regular attendees of our conferences may know, the last couple of years we haven't had a panel on hemp, and that's because as we were making those tough choices about what panels to keep and which ones to drop, hemp wasn't making the cut. And so this year, when we began this discussion, I said, you know, we really ought to talk about hemp, and we ought to talk about why we haven't been talking about hemp. Because that, I think, is an important discussion to have. And the reason is, when I got into this movement in the early 1990s, it was largely because I read a book that you're all familiar with, called The Emperor Wears No Clothes by Jack Bronner. And the thing is prior to reading that book, I'd been anti-prohibition, I'd been angry about our marijuana policy, but I hadn't been pro-pot. I hadn't been excited about marijuana. And The Emperor Wears No Clothes and this issue of hemp is what got me excited again about cannabis. And I think it got a whole lot of people excited about cannabis during that time, because the hemp issue is what bridged the gap from the 1980s, where you couldn't get any traction with marijuana, to the mid-1990s, where suddenly we had this renaissance again, this explosion in interest, largely triggered by medical marijuana and the passage of medical cannabis in 1996. But the reality is when I got excited about marijuana law reform, I got excited about hemp, it was my belief that this was what was going to be the game changer, not medical marijuana. And here we are in 2012, and here we are politically talking about marijuana law reform in a manner that socially, we've really never had the sort of discussions we're having now about legalization, about taxes and revenue that might be gleaned from a legal cannabis market, about the therapeutic potential of medical marijuana. But what's not front and center anymore in this discussion is hemp. So what happened? Where did the enthusiasm go about hemp? And that's why I've assembled this panel of people here that have a unique expertise and that I'm hoping can once again articulate why hemp is relevant, can once again get us as a movement excited about hemp, the way in the early 90s people like me were excited about hemp. Quickly, to tell you who we've got here on this panel, we have David Bronner, president of Dr. Bronner's Magic Soaps.
Yeah.
He's on the board of directors of Hemp. We have Chris Conrad, author of the book Hemp, Lifeline to the Future, which I also read very shortly after The Emperor Wears No Clothes. It's also a tremendous book. He's also the founder and director of the Business Alliance for Cannabis Hemp. Rick Cusick is here. He's the associate publisher of High Times magazine, and was involved in the short-lived Hemp Times magazine. And we have Patrick Goggin, who is an attorney based in San Francisco. He's the California Legal Counsel for Vote Hemp. And my first question, I'm sorry, we have State Assemblyman Christopher Norby. Who's the last minute addition, a very important addition to this panel. And he was the co-sponsor of the California Industrial Hemp Act, Hemp Farming Act, which is somewhat unique in contemporary times, in that California is actually still politically having discussions about hemp. It's actually having many of the discussions that other states were having 15 years ago. They're not having those discussions anymore. California is, and I'm sure he'll talk to us more about that. But my first question to all of you, and because of time, I hope one or two of you can chime in so we can keep this dialogue moving, is what happened to hemp? Is my impression wrong, or has something happened to the enthusiasm that we as a movement had in the early 1990s, but doesn't seem as apparent today? Has hemp been surpassed by these other issues? And if so, how do we make it relevant once again?
Hemp advocacy in the United States is alive and kicking and well. We've got 17 states that have passed pro-hemp legislation in the past decade or so. In fact, this year, the states of Colorado and New Hampshire have passed both pro-hemp legislation. The California legislature, over the past 5 years, passed legislation in 3 separate sessions, most recently last year, only to have Governor Schwarzenegger and then Governor Brown veto it. And I'll let the assembly member at the table who co-sponsored it speak to us about that. But just to note, we also have recently introduced, to go along with the House Bill 1831, which would leave it to the states to regulate hemp. We just had a Senate bill, a companion bill, introduced this year, and I'll let David Bronner speak more about that.
But Chris, did you want to?
Yeah, I would just say that what happened to hemp is that in '89, I formed the Business Alliance for Commerce and Hemp and put a strategy out there of trisecting the subject of cannabis into 3 specific fields: industrial hemp, medical marijuana, and personal use of cannabis, and attacking all 3 fronts at once and seeing where we got the movement. Now, of those 3 things, medical marijuana was a little bit known, but not very much. Personal use was kind of something you weren't really supposed to talk about that much. But an industrial hemp had been like totally lost in the shuffle. And as Keith mentioned earlier today, 1990 was a year when there was a huge shift, and that had to do with, I think, a couple of things all converging. The first was that I had already gotten my organization up and chapters around the country going. The second was that I and Jack Herrer put out the 1990 edition of The Emperor Wears No Clothes, which sent shockwaves across the country and around the world. The third was that a guy named Dana Beal in New York got hold of some of our hemp literature, and at the New York Earth Day in 1990, they passed out 1 million copies of a leaflet that on the front said the many uses of hemp, and on the back it said hemp for the ecology. And so we mainstreamed straight into the environmental movement. Everybody who went to New York City for that year came back with a piece of paper telling them about hemp was part of their agenda, which they hadn't known before. And then the other thing was that the Cannabis Action Network was going around the country doing tours, and they didn't have literature, and so we were providing literature for them. And when those all came together, all of a sudden, within a year or two, we had people who had never even thought about hemp suddenly being aware of it, and that included like my grandmother, for example, who was not really pro-marijuana, but when I talked about hemp, she's like, oh, I remember hemp. And so we jumped across a generation, and that she didn't even have any idea of the potential of it, so even her generation was interested in it. And it went everywhere, got really excited. We had college campuses, on groups all over the country that got really excited, and the trajectory for the activism took off very high. Meanwhile, on the business side, something else was happening. The people who got into the businesses of hemp made some fundamental mistakes. One of them was that we had said that hemp has all these different uses, and so when people got interested in making hemp products, they thought, well, make one of everything. And then when they were done, they had one of everything, but they didn't have any money left to market it, and they didn't know which product was the good product. And so we had to get this convergence with the businesses, how they could approach this issue, as well as the way the activists were approaching the issue. And then when we followed with the activists, there was another split that kind of happened where we got the Hemp Industries Association formed in 1994, talking about hemp as a different subject than marijuana because we saw it as a non-drug issue, and we're talking about saving the world and creating jobs, not getting high, so it should be treated differently. So the Hemp Industries Association came along and started working out from that point of view. But then another group, the North American Industrial Hemp Council, was formed, and they were like anti-marijuana, pro-hemp. And so what happened though was the activists kind of shot off in one direction, got really worked up, and then all of a sudden medical marijuana came along, and the activists said, hey, that's the future, jumps into medical marijuana, and left the hemp issue hanging. But the business trajectory was quite different. The business trajectory was, at first they were skeptical about the information about hemp. It took them a while to find out and understand it. There were challenges to how it would work. There were problems with how to source it. The federal government jumped down their throat a couple of times, like C&S Lumber decided to make hemp, import hemp from China to make building materials, and the feds, they didn't seize their product, they tied it up in customs for 6 months or 9 months or whatever it was, so that they could no longer financially keep their product going by the time they got it out there. And we had the Lakota Indians decide to go forward, and the DEA comes in and violates their foreign treaties and everything with this massive suppression against things. But then at the same time, when the DEA came in and tried to redefine the marijuana laws to include industrial hemp products and food products, particularly the HIA, and I'm looking at some of the board members in who were at the vote down in Hawaii, but we decided to go ahead and sue the DEA. This is like one of the few times when an activist organization has successfully sued the DEA and won, and forced them to change their position. But people, the idea of hemp saving the world was sold in such a hyperbolic manner initially that I don't think it could sustain that level of energy in the activist community, because it turns out it takes a long time to save the world and a lot of work goes down to do it. It wasn't just, oh, it's an idea and now the world's saved. But on the industrial side, we've seen a whole different trajectory going on where more and more products, businesses that make products and know how to market those products found how to incorporate hemp into them. Whether it be textile products and paper products, primarily in the seed oil industry, which was a sleeper. And that's where I think we're going to hear a lot from David Bronner. And just to keep this really short, I'm just going to say that a couple of other things that happened was that in Europe, the government over there, the EU, created a subsidy for hemp. And the farmers over there, rather than use that to create hemp, they used it to milk the subsidies. And then the subsidies got pulled, and so the economic value of hemp in Europe was trashed because of the way that the farmers went. They saw it as a money crop rather than as an industrial crop. But meanwhile, Canada and China have totally seen the value of moving forward with cannabis, hemp, and so this is where we're seeing the growth going on in these other countries, because as long as America won't let the farmers go in here, it's so difficult to have the economics of fiber crops work out in this country as to be extremely difficult. And then, so the future, I think, has to do with the fact that we're really reaching the point of no return planetarily about how we're going to survive. And this whole oil industrial complex industry we've got right now is not sustainable. And my great fear is that the way that hemp ends up saving the world is because there's a few people with a few handfuls of seeds left who haven't gotten poisoned to death by the toxicity of the way that we've created this world right now, and that they decide that this is the only way that they can come it through. I think that we can prevent that if we can get the enthusiasm back where it belongs. And to that extent, I would say that the gentleman secondarily to me, and I recognize the legislator for his important role, but David Bronner really represents the point where the activist enthusiasm and excitement and new ways of bringing the information has coincided with the businesses of making it work, making products that you can continue to buy it from the farmers and keep it moving forward. And so the issue isn't really what happened to hemp, that it went away anywhere. It's just it shifted from being this explosive, radioactive sort of activist movement sort of thing into something where it's really become into the economy in ways that are less exciting to the activists, but profoundly important to the future. And so I think that we're going to see the next wave coming up very soon.
You know, I mean, basically the hemp markets are, I mean, they are very real and significant, but they're not maybe the overheated hype from back in the day that, you know, the activist space, including myself, got really excited about. But they are, you know, extremely significant. The primary market driver in the United States is seed. So hemp seed is unparalleled in its essential fatty acid content. It contains an ideal balance of omega-3 and omega-6. Omega-3s are systematically deficient in the American diet. doctors recommend fish oil supplements, flax supplements. So hemp is actually better than fish because it doesn't contain mercury contaminations and other PCBs and environmental toxins. So hemp seed is at this point is on pretty much every single store shelf in America. I mean, it's gone from the movement, from this kind of activist movement into this mainstream. And you know, we have Costco. We've got hemp nut in Costco now. I mean, it's just everywhere. So you know, and every single German automobile on the road right now is made with a biocomposite of hemp fiber and polypropylene, which is briefcases. I mean, it's just, I mean, the markets are real and rapidly developing. And from the drug reform standpoint, I mean, which I come from, I mean, basically putting hemp seed foods on these shelves and beating DEA and high versus DEA. I mean, the first time DEA lost was when DEA tried to ban hemp seed imports, and we won. And when we won, we were able to like continue this wave of hemp products on the store shelves. So like your mom, you know, and grandmothers can, you know, just get down with like, it's like open up cultural space to talk about cannabis, talk about, oh, this is silly, look, you know, it's got all this nutritious seed, it's fiber, it's not this plant with roots and health. So, I mean, from the drug reform standpoint, it's been a, you know, very successful trajectory. Yeah, it hasn't saved the planet yet, but I mean, there's amazing things happening around the world. The Canadian government is matching funding for a $15 million build out of Stemergy, which is a supplier of hemp fiber to the automobile industry. The Chinese government, we don't advertise the policy. There's a couple of rags we do, West Coast Leaf and O'Shaughnessy's. We put in, if you've seen our ad, it has Hun Jintao, the Chinese president or former, you know, it's in transition, but there's a picture of him visiting a hemp factory in Yunnan. And the Chinese government is investing tens of millions of dollars into the hemp industry there. They plan to put 22 million hectares of hemp. The Olympic flooring in the Beijing Center was a hemp composite. So there's all kinds of amazing things happening in the hemp front. And I have a bomb to drop that I'm gonna wait though for.
Go ahead, take it.
There's a truism that has echoed through the last several centuries. I'm not even sure who said it, but you've all heard it. War is the health of the state. If you favor a big authoritarian state, then you favor permanent war, whether it's a model, a domestic model, or a foreign model. Now, I don't favor an all-powerful state. I favor a limited government which protects our freedom and provides certain basic services. So I like to tell my conservative friends that if you are a real limited government conservative, you can't favor war as a permanent policy domestically or in foreign policy, but unfortunately many of them do. I am a member of the state legislature. I represent the 72nd District in North Orange County. I am a Republican, and I come from a fairly Republican district. I did vote in favor of Senate Bill 676, which was sponsored by Leno. I keep calling him Jay, but it's what's his first name? Mark Leno. Mark Leno from San Francisco. It did pass the Senate 26-13, and also passed the Assembly, which I sit in, 47-26. Now the parties are kind of split on this issue. I like to tell my Democratic friends that I say, look, where's the Democratic leadership on this? We've got William F. Buckley, we've got George Will, we've got Ron Paul, we've got George Schultz, and we need more Democrats on board. They agree. But Republicans have, of course, their issues as well with this. Now, I voted in favor of the bill. I got 3 other Republicans. I kind of dragged them kicking and screaming voting for it as well. So there were a total of only 4, but there were 4 Republicans that voted for the legalization of hemp in California. In addition to myself, there was Cameron Smythe from Santa Clarita in LA County, and my good friend Bill Berryhill and David Valadeo, who both represent San Joaquin Valley constituencies, who came from counties whose sheriffs had written in support of the bill, saying that they didn't see a law enforcement issue at all. But during the hearing, and among the lobbyists, you had the narcotics officers and the other law enforcement unions talking about how bad this bill was and how it was just a cover for a slippery slope toward legalization of all this other stuff. There were 3 arguments against it. One was that all these hemp plants will hide the marijuana, the real marijuana, inside. So all the narcotics officers driving down these country roads will see hemp plants and they'll be covered for the smokable stuff. Of course, that wasn't true because maybe some of you understand this better than I, but the pollen doesn't mix, and if you try to mix these plants together, you ruin both. The other was, what's this going to look like on a hit piece? I mean, whenever you vote in Sacramento, you think, and this is even more true in Washington, because in Sacramento we've got term limits, so people are always looking to run for the next office. Now with term limit reform, you're going to have a whole new class of legislators that'll be in there for 12 years rather than just for 6 years in the Assembly or 8 in the Senate. I think this is a positive change. I think a lot of them will be looking more toward long-term change rather than just what's the next office I'm going to run for and what will the hit pieces look like. Now, and so they're thinking, gee, you know, Fred Schmaltz voted to legalize pot, and you'll have all these, you know, right out of Reefer Madness. This doesn't sell in a lot of places, and it doesn't sell in my county either. Actually, they got so many hits on me, but they never used them. I ran in a Republican primary against a fellow Republican, conservative, when I first won this seat. She criticized my stand on medical marijuana, but I was never hit on it. They never sent literature because they're not sure who do you send this literature to when you hit this stuff. Because you may hit somebody that might respond, but their husband or their wife or their kids may read the literature first and realize this stuff is ridiculous. And I'm going to vote for this guy, whoever he is. I was the only mayor in Orange County to come out in favor of Prop 215 in 1996 when I was mayor of Fullerton. And I got a call from the state chairman of the Republican Party, a good friend of mine, who said, Norby, you're on the website in favor of legalization of medical marijuana. I said, yeah, so what? Aren't you for this? Well, sure I'm for it, but they're going to hit you with this in the next election. Well, aren't you? Well, sure I'm for it, but I said, this thing is going to win in my city. How would they hit me for it? Well, I know it may win, but they're still going to hit you. Look, this is going to win in Orange County. It's going to win statewide. How are they going to hit me on something that the voters are in favor of? Well, they still will. Of course, they didn't, because when the thing turns, it no longer is worth a hit piece. And I knew, too, they wouldn't come out after me against this. Now, having said that, I am in a close race now against an opponent who has the support of all the law enforcement unions, and I think they're coming after me on this issue. They can't say it because it's not really that popular an issue to hit somebody with it, despite the political reluctance to support it. But it did pass 47 to 26 in the Assembly and went on to the governor. And the governor used the third argument against it, not the hit piece argument, not that it's going to hide marijuana plants, but he said, look, right or wrong, this stuff is still banned under federal law, and even though the law is absurd, I'm not going to put California farmers in jeopardy for being arrested, so Governor Brown did veto the bill. And he vetoed it for a reason which was legally logical, but at the same time politically, if states start to go in this direction, even Paul Ryan himself, I think, was quoted yesterday in Colorado saying, look, this is a states' rights issue. It shouldn't be a federal issue. I hope he says that if he's vice president, from all the influence he may have. And I'm sure you'll get Joe Biden to say something like that. I mean, Joe said everything else, and maybe he'll come out with that in the vice presidential debate, because it certainly wasn't addressed last night in the presidential debate. Anyway, it was vetoed. I'm sure it will come back. When it does, I'll support it. And I think the governor may have a different view on this as well. So support those people that support it. Make it a political issue. It's not just a fringe issue. There's an entire law enforcement industrial complex that has to do with prisons. It has to do with those that are employed in law enforcement agencies. It has to do with those that sell technology. It has to do those to do with that sell drones that are now can legally unmanned aircraft that can crisscross our state. It has to do with lives that are lost in the criminal justice system. People who wind up committing felonies, sometimes even a third strike, who've hurt no one, but they've gotten involved in possessing certain amounts of marijuana or certain amounts of drugs. They go to jail for that. They wind up on probation. When they violate probation because they didn't make a phone call at a certain time, they go back again, and because they maybe gave it to a friend who then felt that they had to report them because the friend was arrested, and the only way they could get out of mandatory prison term was to become an informant for the police department or the sheriff's department. There was a great article in the New Yorker. Did any of you read this just last month about a whole generation of kids in college who were being arrested and are saying, you're going to go to prison unless you turn informant, and then they turn informant, and they never let them go, and they have to inform on friends. All this stuff is involved with this. It's very, very, very expensive. It destroys lives, and it's, I think, something that people, regardless of their political labor, are more and more willing to look at. I'm willing to look at it, And I think more and more people in the state have. So whatever you're doing, whether it's hemp, whether it's other uses of this, you've got to continue. Because you have to remember three things about the truth. First, it's ridiculed, then it's savagely attacked, and then it's accepted as conventional wisdom. I'm not sure at what point we are at this, but I've got so many people, not just younger, and I'm not young, I'm 62, not just my generation, older generation as well. I mean, look at George Shultz, former Secretary of State. He's got to be pushing in his mid-90s, who will say, under their breath, Norby, you're right, this stuff ought to be regulated, legalized, and taxed, but if I say that, I'll be killed politically. No, you won't, because I've been saying this, I haven't been even touched. Is not just to reflect what you think your constituents want on the surface, but tell them what they think they should want. It's an exchange. It's not just poll them and do what they tell you, it's also tell them the alternatives and to educate them. I was a high school classroom teacher for 25 years. I've got a son who just graduated at USC, who is a head of one of the, he was involved in the, the Students for a Sensible Drug Policy, and it's about treating adults in a mature way so they can make adult decisions about their own lives. And if you phrase it like that, who will disagree with you?
That guy's my favorite Republican in the whole world. I'm going to say a couple of things. I might be a little bit of a contrarian here, perhaps. I just listened to the four gentlemen here, and pretty much they brought me up to date about what's happening in hemp. Everything here you're talking about, that it's alive and well, and everything you're doing is phenomenally, it's a wonderful thing and something that should be continued. But until you just informed me that hemp is still alive and well, I wasn't aware of that. And when I was asked to be on this panel, I was kind of like, what am I doing on this panel? What's happened to hemp? The first thing wasn't to me thinking, well, it's not here anymore, it's dead. What happened to hemp? What I thought was why, that question means how come hemp didn't become a major industry? Back in the 90s when I first got involved in this, and I came the same way you did, I came in through reading The Emperor, and I came in through starting hemp initiatives in Jersey and things like that, and never went anywhere, I didn't know what I was doing. But the point is, at that point, we thought that hemp was going to become a major industry. We thought Calvin Klein, we thought, Giorgio Armani and all this stuff. A lot of it back then, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of it was about fiber back then. The first thing that came along was all about clothes, and you could buy all these clothes, but the actual clothes were very expensive because they were imported. You had to import every single fiber that you had here, and that puts you at odds with trying to compete with domestic products such as synthetics and cotton. At least that's how it appeared to me as a business model. I thought the business model was right. Now, I'm happy to hear what you're telling me. What I hear here is that most of the hemp that is now in there is in the form of food and is in the form of products. And actually, the fiber thing is gone because the price point never went down to the comfort point. And that's the first thing that I noticed. I'm answering the question why I think it didn't become a major industry. The second reason I think it didn't become a major industry, and I'm sure a lot will disagree with me here, but what happened to hemp? The second part of that question is, what happened in my heart? Why don't I care as much about hemp anymore? I used to care an enormous amount. It brought me to this, it brought me to my job. And I don't really care that much about it. I'm not that enthused about it anymore. I certainly don't look up hemp on Google and find out what's going on, where I would have in the 1990s. Well, why was that? Well, as I got involved into it, and I read Jack's book, and I knew how Jack felt about marijuana as well as hemp, that really excited me. And then I started getting involved because I was a big fan of marijuana. And so I felt that marijuana and hemp were together, and then I thought the fight would be the same fight. And then when I got into it, I found a lot of hempsters, not the ones on this panel. And I'm not being condescending, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, it's not the ones on this panel, but a lot of hempsters wanted to shy away from marijuana. It's not dope, it's rope. Well,
and soap.
And soap. And you can say that, and it's all true to a certain extent, but here's the other truth, is that hemp has the same enemies as marijuana. And you can sit there and say, no, this is something different, but eventually you're going to come up against a ceiling where you can only go so far before your enemies kick in and say, no, 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 we're not going to allow that to happen. And I think that's what happened to hemp. And I'm going to finish really quickly with what I really feel here. I think the medical marijuana industry should pay attention to what happened to the hemp industry. They are divorcing themselves from recreational cannabis, enhancing cannabis. Are going to have a limited amount of place before the enemies kick in and say, wait a minute, we're not going to allow this to happen. I'm not saying that if the hemp industry embraced marijuana entirely that it would be a major industry, but I think it would have happened differently. I think my heart would still be in hemp if that didn't happen, because I tell you something, the very first time somebody I respected said to me, it's not dope, it's rope. I started feeling cool towards this entire industry. And that's what happened to me. And that's what happened to him.
If I could move this discussion a little bit further. Patrick, in particular, you mentioned the fact that we had these 17 states where some legislation has been enacted regarding hemp. And I know in some of these states, like North Dakota and Montana, the legislation itself actually allows for hemp cultivation. And my understanding is the reason that there is still, of course, no actual hemp cultivation in those states, despite the passage of these laws, is because the Assemblyman mentioned, we run up against this argument that, well, it is still federally illegal. Now, we also have 17 states that allow for the use of medical marijuana, which of course is equally federally illegal. Yet we have pragmatic models like in Colorado and in Maine and New Mexico and in a number of other states coming very quickly to fruition like New Jersey and Connecticut and Vermont, where these states are moving forward. They are putting their acceptance to the notion of licensing the production and distribution of hemp, regardless of the fact that the federal government says you can't do it. So my question is, why have we not seen a similar showdown under the same principles that this is a state versus federal issue, and why haven't some of these states pushed the envelope with the federal government in the same manner that we've seen a handful now, but a growing number of medical marijuana states basically welcome this battle?
Well, we actually have. We saw a battle ultimately occur in the courts in North Dakota, where originally DEA license was required, but when the DEA delayed implementation of that or issuing licenses or permits, the legislature unanimously passed an amendment removing that barrier. But the approach was to go to court to make sure that we didn't want to put farmers in jeopardy. And so we went into court, we sought declaratory relief, a ruling from the court that would allow us to engage in and assert our state rights to grow industrial hemp. And in that circuit, I believe it was the 8th Circuit, which is similar to prior precedent. Regardless of the structure of the bill, the courts in, I believe it's the 1st Circuit initially, and then the 8th Circuit said, this is a congressional issue, you gotta go to Congress to change the law. The way marijuana is defined under federal law is it includes industrial hemp, or it doesn't distinguish between industrial hemp except for by allowing us to possess sterilized seed and fiber. We were primed for the showdown in California. Had either Governor Schwarzenegger or Governor Brown just signed the bill, we would have had our day in court. And the statement by Governor Brown that this was an absurd policy and yet I'm not going to put our farmers in jeopardy was in fact an absurd statement. We went to the governor and said, we will, the way the bill was structured, we needed to have seed from within the state, and there was no way the farmers were going to go just get unsterilized hemp seed. And we would have stood in front of farmers planning and said, we're going to go into court, we're going to seek a preliminary injunction, and we're going to get a court to order and rule and allow us, our farmers, to grow before we would put them in jeopardy. Unfortunately, that day never came.
Yeah, so I mean, just as you said, and I think just the fundamental difference between industrial hemp and medical marijuana is, I mean, you have the same basic state permission to grow industrial hemp and medical marijuana and a federal prohibition. The difference is that with medical, you have a relatively small number of plants. You have life and death, or at least like, a huge increase in personal well-being at stake. And so there's a huge motivation to break the law for a few number of plants. It's not a big deal. Whereas with industrial hemp, you have, sure, farmers want a profitable rotation crop, but to grow over 1 million plants on 10 acres, right? I mean, under federal law, I mean, this is multiple life sentencing. This is totally different. You're not going to have civil disobedience with farmers growing acres and acres of hemp, which is what you need to do to make it commercially viable. There's no point growing 12 plants, 12 industrial hemp plants, or 99 industrial hemp plants. That would make like 2 bottles of our soap. I mean, so that's fundamentally, that's the number one reason why the difference. You don't have civil disobedience with farmers growing hemp, because they don't have that much motivation to do it. I mean, yeah, they want money, but
are there hemp bills in Congress, and what is the status?
So then just to quickly, just what Patrick was saying, our judicial strategy was really sound, and it just sucked. We had to go up through the 8th Circuit. North Dakota had a perfect hemp bill. It was all in-state seed that would be planted. It was basically the Raich precedent. Raich basically said that because medicine is fungible with the illicit market for drug marijuana, there'll be inevitable diversion and swelling of the interstate market for drug marijuana. So we had a perfect case. We're like, okay, well, we're defining cannabis to be non-drug. No flowers may leave the farm. Only fiber and sterilized seed, which are unregulated, are being placed in interstate commerce. If there's any diversion of the flowers, it's not fungible with the interstate market of drug marijuana, or it is in the way oregano is. I mean, there's no substitution, and it was a beautiful strategy. But we just had a retarded 8th Circuit judges, and we just we really wish we could have sent this through the 9th Circuit, but we just kept getting vetoed by Schwarzenegger. And we couldn't launch that strategy. It was unfortunate. So what we've lacked really is a federal champion. I mean, this is so here's the differences, basically between medical and industrial. So we need to change federal law. I mean, we're not going to get. It doesn't matter how many more states we get. People are not going to break federal law and grow industrial hemp.
That's right.
And so here's the bomb. So 2 days ago, Rand Paul's chief of staff called me up. So Rand Paul is introduced with Senator Wyden from Oregon a bill into the Senate in August. And I always thought Wyden was the guy kind of heading this. He's a Democrat, great. But Rand Paul is all about it. And if you Google Rand Paul and hemp, you can just see the guy is making this his issue. He's the rock star right now on the Republican side. I don't care if it's Romney, I don't care if it's Obama. We're going to push this Senate, because I'm talking to him, it's like, all you need to do is have the executive branch make the DOJ just say industrial hemp grown pursuant to state law is fine. You don't need to actually change federal law. You can just have a policy change within the executive branch, which that's where Obama has been so incredibly disappointing. As an Illinois state senator, voted twice for industrial hemp farming, and it's just been a complete disappointment. As he has been on medical and everything else.
What kind of blowback do you think will come from that? Like when you say, okay, we're going to separate this, we want to make, just so you can make industrial hemp, well, do you think at that point the DEA is going to go and say, no, it's a stalking horse for legalization?
Oh, of course, yeah, it's the drug, it's the same thing. And just, strategically, as far as why industrial hemp, we put on and we play it straight and don't say, hey, we're with medical and we're with recreational and it's all one wonderful plan and all needs to happen.
That's extremely valuable to do that, and extremely valuable. But I think strategically that at the end of the game, until you legalize marijuana, everything is the red-headed stepchild of it. Because they're going to come after you. They're going to come after you, and they're going to have more power than you have in that factory. Factionalization is the worst thing that ever happened to marijuana law reform. And as we sit here and bicker with each other about whether or not it's hemp, or it's medicine, or it's a recreational object, our enemies sit back and applaud. Don't worry, they're going to kill themselves in this issue.
Right. To address it is so basically that you have. I mean, like Bronner, for instance, like we give Ace $100 grand a year. You know, we give MAPS a lot of money. I'm going to be on the board. I'm all about legalization of everything.
Yeah,
I think psychedelics and marijuana are key to the survival of the species.
Not the people on this. I know you're saying
okay, but I'm all in favor of the industrial hemp only. I mean, when you have a hemp, like a bunch of activists making crappy products was not the way to do it. I mean, we have to have. The hemp has a coalition of conservative farmers who want nothing to do with pot. I mean, we have businessmen so as far as let's just say the hemp fiber problem with clothing and why it's so expensive. Well, the big breakthrough we need is cottonization of hemp fiber so it can run on the cotton gin infrastructure. So that's been really what's holding up hemp. But there's been all these breakthroughs that are happening right now. Naturally Advanced Technologies out of Oregon is working with Hain underwear.
Right.
Unfortunately, they're kind of switching to flax just because of the prohibition. But this technology, as it happens, hemp is going to be a big deal.
100%.
But we need to play it straight as a word. When you put on the hemp hat.
Strategically, I think you have to play it straight. But I also if all the hemp companies had the way that Dr. Bronner's approaches this, I would be very happy because you don't deny. I read this morning, getting ready for this. I read your website this morning. You don't deny the presence of marijuana, the psychoactive cousin of hemp. You're not denying. A lot of people back as I remember it, in the 90s, they were viciously against being involved in marijuana law reform. And I think that was a strategic mistake.
Absolutely. Okay, well, here's to get some, kind of inside drama, baseball. So NIHC, which Chris was talking about, North Industrial Hemp Council, was formed basically just like that. It was a bunch of conservative, ag bureaucrats and industry. And
if I recall, is that James Woolsey?
James Woolsey was the lobbyist
from the CIA.
And they had the strategy. Okay, let's kick out all the hippies, everyone with any remote tie to marijuana or medical. We're kicking them out. And then they kicked out all their best people. And then the DA attacked us anyway, right? And then so we go, it's okay, well, we gotta fucking fight the DEA. And and they're all, Woolsey, they're all we're serving them hemp foods, and they're just completely lame. That organization.
Get closer to the mic.
Yeah.
I can't hear a damn.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Sure. Okay. So anyway, to back up Rick's point, there was back in the day the North American Industrial Hemp Council was formed expressly to basically kick out all hippies out of hemp, and we're going to cut a deal with the DEA and grow hemp for fiber. And that strategy was stupid. It didn't work. The DEA attacked us anyway, and the NIHC ended up folding up shop and disappearing. So yeah, but nonetheless, the markets for hemp are growing, and you have to be, you got to talk about omega-3 for health and fiber for. You got to talk about it. You can't be and marijuana is great because it's awesome. It's it's interfering with the marketing. You got to focus on your marketing message. And
I think you got to play it straight. I think you got to play it straight, and I also think that you, in playing it straight, you shouldn't be in a position of denying what it is.
Sure.
And that's what I think has happened in the past. No, it's not dope. It's rope. In fact, it is dope. That's a bad word for it, but in fact it is dope, and that's my whole point, is that I think that denying it, it's not that I'm asking hemp companies to advocate for legalization, this is the position of this company. I'm asking them to not distance themselves from legalization entirely, because I think it's a misstep, because ultimately the people against legalization will step up and say, you're the same people as me.
Well, just to say, what was very helpful, for instance, Nature's Path, granola, I don't know who's familiar, it's the leading independent, natural cereal company. So Aaron Stevens, found his guru and was spinning out of control with drugs, and he's totally anti-drug. So Aaron Stevens is totally anti-drug guy. But he loves hemp, and he thinks it's very healthy, and he has some of the market-leading hemp products. And he basically anchored the market when DEA attacked us, and we're talking to Whole Foods and Wild Oats. They're all like, man, we got fucking Schedule 1 drugs on our shelves. We got to get rid of it. And having Aaron Stevens to be able to, to just say, hey, don't worry about it. This is nothing to do with marijuana. We're going to win. This is stupid. Having him being there and just, from basically being anti-marijuana, pro-hemp guy was hugely helpful.
You should have those like that. There should be a position in which you play it straight. We're not talking about marijuana. We never will. But I saw too many people sit there and try and distance themselves.
I know about the hurdles that exist in America, but is there any place right now on this planet that you believe has fully embraced the potential of hemp? If so, where is it? And if not, why? Why are we still waiting for this plant to reach its full potential?
China is unfortunately leading the way. I mean, the Chinese government is investing hugely into their hemp industry. If you Google China hemp, it'll bring up this page, and you'll see Hun Jintao visiting this huge factory in Yunnan. They aim to basically use that as a rural, like solving rural poverty and everything Jack dreamed of is the Chinese government is getting after it. And there are some real breakthrough R&D challenges that are as they get solved, they're really going to open it up. I mean, basically, again, cottonization of hemp fiber to make it, as economic as cotton will be huge. The Canadian, the fiber processing technology. I mean, the overall trend is looking for natural fiber alternatives to synthetic fibers. I mean, the sad history of hemp is going to reverse. As this overall trend continues, hemp, it's not going to be the one fiber. I mean, it's going to be hemp, it's going to be flax, it's going to be a bunch of fiber. But all these fiber crops are going to grow in importance. And especially hemp, because it doesn't need to compete with food crops, because it is a food crop, so when it generates its waste straw, I mean, there's a lot of huge potential in hemp. But yeah, it's not happening as fast as everyone thought, but it will happen.
Sorry.
Hey guys. One more. Whatever happened to hemp? Whatever happened to hemp? It's right here. On the stage.